Thank you. The next part of the conference, in a discussion on ex-Muslims of Britain and in Europe, chaired by Professor John Adams. The panelists are already there. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for that. Welcome everybody to the afternoon session. The afternoon session of any conference, the after lunch session, is always traditionally the most lively, vivacious and challenging, and I'm sure this will be no different in that regard. The other great tradition, of course, is that it starts late, and I'm afraid we are running a bit behind, but we'll try and make up some time. The topic for this afternoon is the position and experience of ex-Muslims in Europe, and we have three distinguished speakers to consider those issues. We have apologies for absence from Hamed. Apparently he was snowed in Germany. I don't know what snow is like in Germany. If it's anything like where I come from, which is North Yorkshire, it would snow anybody in. But we do have three people who are here to speak to us. From right to left, as it were, as you look at it, we have Anne-Marie Waters, Alam Shahar, and Hassan Radwan. And I've asked them to speak for about no more than 10 minutes. And then that should allow plenty of time for debate, conversation, contributions, and whatever. We sort of imposed a batting order before we started, and so Anne-Marie.
Oh, did I lose?
you were the most imposed.
Sorry, okay.
So Anne-Marie Waters.
All right, thank you. Right, I'm going to talk a little bit about asylum. Is that too loud? Sorry. A little bit about asylum and the law, and the laws on asylum in Europe and in the West generally. And we've talked a little bit about secularism today and the importance of secularism as being a separation of religion from politics. And it's essential for democracy because it gives us freedom of thought. But something else that's essential for democracy is a separation of law and politics. And that's not just an independent judiciary, it's also a separation or a making sure that the law is not subject to the politics of the day, and that the law is applied consistently and not sort of bowed to political whims or political convenience, which I think it often is. I've done a lot of research on asylum and apostasy in the last year, and one of the most striking and probably most worrying things about it is the inconsistency in which asylum laws are applied. And the law is actually very clear on it. I mean, it says that many countries, signatory countries to UN legislation, are obliged to grant asylum to any person who is at risk of persecution because of their belonging to a particular race, religion, or any other particular group. And I don't know, I mean, I know there are different ways of interpreting laws, but I don't really see how we can interpret that other than to say that we are obliged to give asylum to anyone who is at risk of persecution because they belong to a different group or a specific group. But we're not applying it consistently at all, and I happen to believe it's because of political convenience. The Human Rights Act, for example, another example is the Sharia courts and tribunals that are operating, which are completely in opposition to the Human Rights Act, but we ignore it because it's politically convenient I think, for the main parties to ignore it. And the same applies here. We have, so let me just see where I am. I mean, I think part of the problem might be, or what people might argue what the problem might be, is the interpretation of the words persecution, for example. Well, we know that there are countries where people are killed for being atheists and apostates. We know there are countries where people are imprisoned and flogged, all sorts of horrible things for openly being apostates or atheists. And I don't know whether they've changed the English language entirely, but that amounts to persecution as far as I'm concerned. We also have the definition of the word particular group, which the law itself defines as being any group of people who share a characteristic other than the risk of persecution, which distinguishes them from the rest of the society that they're in. We know that there are people fleeing from theocratic societies, from theocratic dictatorships, because they're atheist. They absolutely do constitute a group of people with a characteristic in common. living within, which distinguishes them from the rest of the society that they're in. So we're just ignoring our obligations under UN legislation and our own Human Rights Act when we deny asylum for people, for apostates and for atheists. And we are denying it, and we're denying it regularly. And one of the excuses that has been used in the last few years for this has been, well, if nobody knows you're an atheist, you're not going to be in any trouble. But we've had a ruling this year in the Supreme Court in the UK that said that gay people shouldn't have to hide their sexuality in order to avoid persecution. So why the distinction? Why the difference? Living a lie can be a nightmare for people, no matter what the lie happens to be, whether it's their sexuality or their atheism. It's a nightmare, and it's completely inconsistent application of the law. What else did I want to say? There's also inconsistencies in how in actual cases. Last year, a group of men were arrested on suspected terrorism charges here, and they weren't deported because the judge said there was evidence that they were at risk of torture. And around the same time, an Iranian woman who had presented evidence that she was not only an atheist and a political dissident, but she was having a relationship with a man who wasn't her husband. She said she was at risk of being killed. Her deportation was pushed through. She was listed for deportation. She wasn't deported because the European Court of Human Rights overturned it. But that's, again, the inconsistency. There is also evidence that women are killed in Iran and other countries for what they would term adultery, but also for political disagreements. So I think we really, asking, and one of the things I've learned as well in the last couple of years of sort of being involved in this, is that when you ask questions, people don't answer you, so you just have to keep asking them. And we have to demand an answer to the question, why the inconsistency? Is it political convenience? And if it is, then we're all in trouble, because if the law bends to political convenience, then it is completely and utterly powerless and useless, and it can't protect us. And we have to demand a consistent application of the law to protect us, and the law should protect us. And it must protect us without distinction and without any exceptions. Thanks.